Уважаемые граждане России,
My fellow citizens,
мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
on my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance.
Наши действия – это самозащита от создаваемых нам угроз.
We have no ambition in Iraq except to remove a threat and restore control of that country to its own people.
Верю в вашу поддержку.
We will defend our freedom. We will bring freedom to others, and we will prevail.
The invasion of Iraq by a coalition of countries led by the USA in 2003 and the Russian invasion of Ukraine are direct violations of the international law and an abuse of the principles of state sovereignty. However, the devil is in details. Iraq in 2003 is a dictatorship, where Saddam Hussein is the one-man leader who has been in power for more than 20 years. He holds the state in iron gloves and stifles any opposition. And it wouldn't matter, but his aggressive foreign policy destabilizes almost the entire region of the Middle East. Hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children were executed during a systematic attempt to exterminate the Kurdish population in Iraq in the Anfal operations in the late 1980s. Human Rights Watch reported that at least 50,000 and possibly as many 100,000 Kurds are estimated to have been killed at the hands of the Ba'ath regime. In 1990s, Iraq's leader Saddam Hussein ordered the invasion and occupation of Kuwait with an apparent aim of acquiring the nation's large oil reserves, canceling a large debt Iraq owed to Kuwait, and expanding Iraqi power in the region. In 1991, the United States led the United Nations coalition to liberate Kuwait from Iraq. As a result, the coalition forces won Operation Desert Storm. In 1991, Hussein signed a ceasefire agreement and released Kuwait. After the war, Iraq was required to submit to inspections to ensure it possessed no chemical or other weapons of mass destruction. Although Iraq was cooperative on what inspectors called the process of allowing inspectors access to suspected weapon sites, for example, it was only marginally cooperative in answering the questions surrounding its weapon programs. Unable to resolve its differences with the Security Council members, who favored strengthening and continuing weapon inspections, the United States abandoned the inspection process and initiated the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Evidently, the US and its allies invaded Iraq not solely in the interest of spreading democracy. We'll consider some other likely reasons. The first is the preservation of power of the USA in the Middle East. Totalitarian Iraq does not fit into the security system. It is a destabilizer. It acted aggressively and unprovoked when it invaded Kuwait. Who knows what Hussein would have done the next time then? Second reason is safety. For the country and the world, what happened on September 11 came as large and nasty shock. Almost no one had even imagined, let alone expected such a spectacular and horrifying event. The assaults represented the first mass casualty attacks by foreigners in the continental United States since the War of 1812. To add to the powerful impression they made, they were captured on video. The whole world could see them. The events of September 11 had the same kind of galvanizing impact on the United States as other similar events in American history. They made the world suddenly seem a far more dangerous place. They generated a public demand for action to meet a new threat, and government responded with alacrity to that demand. The third reason is the electoral request. The terrorist attacks of 9/11 had a huge impact on the American society. The scapegoat became Iraq, with which the American press linked the terrorist attacks. By demolishing Hussein's regime, the USA solved the issues of interest in the Middle East and satisfied the electoral demand of the population. In the article Why Don't Democracies Fight Each Other, the dependence between elections and wars can be traced. Often to rely the population around themselves, politicians resort to that sort of ventures. Presidents in democratic countries are more likely to use force when their performance ratings in public opinion polls are problematic. The invasion of Iraq rallied the population around the leader. Was it the main task of the war? Probably not. But such an option was taken into account. Saddam Hussein, on the eve of the invasion, himself gave many ghosts, associating him with the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Immediately after the terrorist attack on September 11, 2001, he openly said on Iraqi television that America deserved it. Now, let's move to Ukraine. Unlike Iraq in 2003, Ukraine is not a dictatorship. It has never resorted to aggression against other countries and has given up nuclear weapons as a result of the Budapest Memorandum. Putin cited security issues as the reasons for the invasion. It's not even about NATO expansion. The alliance was not going to take Ukraine there shortly. Ukraine was pro-Western and the most democratic among the states of the post-Soviet Union, not taking into account the Baltic states. If Moscow wanted to revive the USSR or the Russian Empire, it would have to overcome this barrier. On July 12, 2021, Putin published an article of his authorship on the historical unity of Ukrainians and Russians. He was addressing the Ukrainians in his speech regarding the recognition of the LDN republics. There was already a threat to destroy Ukrainian statehood. Putin's words and news about the possible referendum that the pro-Russian government wants to hold in the occupied territories, contrary to all norms, testified to the Kremlin's denial not only sovereignty, but also a people's right to self-determination. Raising the political rating and at the expense of an external threat also works in a case of dictatorships. The political technologists of the Kremlin certainly hoped to rally the population around the leader, but the protracted nature and the bloodshed of the war lead to an opposite consequences, and may become the beginning of the power crisis in the future. After the start of the invasion of Iraq, anti-war protests began in the United States. Criticism of the government developed, and a lively discussion took place in America about the necessity of this war. A Russian researcher analyzed the New York Times publications regarding the assessment of the invasion of Iraq. According to its results, not only pacifist but also pro-Iranian publications were found in the editorial office, which indicates the absence of censorship on this issue during the conflict. For years before the war, Russian state television unjustifiably demonized Ukraine and suppressed any manifestation of an independent assessment of events. Thus, at the time of the invasion of Ukraine, Russia was at the peak of the censorship. The one who criticized the actions of Bush Jr. in the USA remained an American and presented a different point of view. Americans did not reject that part of society that was against the war. Moscow, on the other hand, made every effort to make the mouthpieces of the opposition outcasts in society, put the yoke on foreign agents on them, accused them of discrediting the Russian army, and threatened them with criminal cases. Total censorship even now prevents Russian society from taking a sober look at the war and assessing its scale. The invasion of Iraq, like the attack on Ukraine, was carried out without the appropriate sanction of the UN Security Council. In the first case, the decision to overthrow Saddam's regime was opposed by France, Germany, Russia, etc. But nevertheless, it is important to talk about the motives of these states. The countries that opposed the invasion of Iraq did not aim to support Saddam's dictatorship. Rather, they were against the principle that the hegemon, in our example the US, can invade countries they don't like, violate their sovereignty, and remove their regime. This thesis is confirmed by the visit of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Yevhen Primakov, to Baghdad on the eve of the US invasion. The Russian diplomat persuaded Hussein to leave the country and not provoke Washington. Still, Hussein disobeyed. I told him that if you want to save your people from the war and the victims, unfortunately inevitable, you must resign from the post of the president. However, the invasion of Iraq was not a purely Washington's affair. Poland, Great Britain, and Australia were involved there. This example shows the power of American diplomacy and states that maybe the countries were against the abuse of the international law, but Saddam was not loved more. At the same time, we have an example of Russian lowliness on the international stage in the war against Ukraine. Iran, China, and even Belarus are afraid to help her directly. Nevertheless, patriotic channels inside the Russian Federation call the occupying forces allied forces. So to speak, the unrecognized republics of the LDNR are now an international coalition for Moscow. How low has draconian diplomacy fallen since the days of the USSR? The invasion of Iraq set a rather dangerous precedent that the great power can solve problems contrary to the institutions of the international law in the 21st century. Today's video is not intended to convince you that some invasions are right or wrong. Wars are a harsh reality of international relations, and in future centuries, people will not live without wars. The US invasion of Iraq was aimed at the overthrowing a bloody dictatorship, certainly not without pragmatic gains for itself. Nevertheless, the international community understood the danger of Saddam Hussein's regime. America did not stifle opposition within its regime, and it did not destroy Iraq as a political idea. At the same time, the Russian Federation is a dictatorship. The interests of this country are interpreted by the interests of the ruling elite, for whom the existence of democracy in a post-Soviet space is a threat, and the existence of Ukraine is a historical mistake. That is why they will screw the nuts inside, give a damn about the opinion of the rest of the countries from the outside, and kill thousands of their soldiers in a war that their country does not need. And about all that has been said, we cannot fail to note one more difference. The invasion of Iraq took place in 2003. For 20 years, this event suffered from harsh criticism in the United States itself. Thanks to the freedom and democracy of this regime, the prospect of a new conflict will be perceived through the prism of the mistakes of the previous one, where the last word may be with the pacifists. While in the dictatorship, the last word will be with the dictator. We hope this video was useful to you. We look forward to your evaluations and comments. Recently, we also opened pages on Facebook and Instagram, where you will find interesting articles from IR and works that inspire us personally. See you next week.